and it is with real pleasure here that I turn to the opportunity to introduce our speaker, Dr. Wen, who is visiting here from the California Institute of Technology, where she works in the scientific research area. Some of you may have seen our announcement, which describes the work that she has been doing now for a number of years. I think has been involved in public speaking about issues of importance worldwide, and of course to the United States with respect to China for the last 12 or more years. And so without further ado, Wen, I will turn it over to you and look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here. This is actually my third talk to World Affairs Council. I gave my first talk to the World Affairs Council chapter in San Diego. That was on Zoom. And the second one was in Las Vegas in January, this January. And what I impressed most is like both clubs that have a mixed population of different political background, like so you see liberals and conservatives. And when I ask questions, the other one starts argue. And it was like a pretty interesting experience. So that was my experience of World Affairs Council. But I think it's very, very important to have this platform for people with completely different background that can share their opinions freely and openly without any fear. And I have been speaking about subjects about China for over 20 years. I was born and raised there. And I came to the United States in 1994, got my PhD in Caltech on biology. And after I got my PhD, I was immediately recruited by Caltech as a staff scientist, and I work on a genomic project as a scientific curator. So my work is pretty interesting. Like I make a living by reading. I read all the cutting edge scientific publication on biology, and I train AI to read like me. And then I also write softwares. I give scientific speeches at conferences. And in my personal time, actually now I'm taking a vacation. I'm taking a 5-week break from my work to speak about China. I have 36 talks in these 5 weeks, and this is my fourth one. I just drove up from California on Tuesday. And I annotate literature in Mandarin, and I craft talks in English. And every year I craft a new topic for Caltech for the Lunar New Year. And also I crafted a talk for Caltech DEI about women's rights in China. And I also crafted quite a few talks for Rotary clubs and other groups. And I always talk about China because that's where I was born. That's what I'm familiar with. That's why I read about Mandarin. And people often ask me the question is that why should we care about China? Like constantly people say we have so many problems like Israel, Russia, and Iran, North Korea. But actually, a lot of these problems are connected because all these totalitarian regimes, they are connected. And China has been the center of this alliance by providing money and technology. For example, if we talk about North Korea, China is a major sponsor of North Korea by providing 90% of its trade, including all the oil and all the food. And China also provides nuclear material, nuclear technology to North Korea. This woman, Ma Xiaohong, a businesswoman in China, was indicted by the US Department of Justice by exporting, because she exported nuclear material to North Korea. She did not do that alone. She actually worked with about 24 companies, including banks, in that building at the border of China and North Korea to do that. And my husband actually used to work for one of those companies. He visited North Korea in the 90s. And Harbin Institute of Technology has been training students and scientists from North Korea, teaching them how to make a nuclear weapon. And Iran is another example. ZTE, a top Chinese IT company, he paid a huge fine in 2017 for exporting exporting US technology to Iran. And Huawei was doing the same business to export and even steal technology from T-Mobile, US technology. So these are just 2 examples of you see where the money and the technology flow, right? When the US companies want to have the Chinese market, usually Chinese government would require them to exchange market with technology. You need to give your technology to the Chinese government to have a share in the Chinese market. And then the Chinese government would give this technology or sell this technology to North Korea and Iran. And from North Korea and Iran, this technology and money can go to ISIS, can go to Russia. And this is how the whole thing goes. And you see China play a very important role in a lot of problems in the world. And we're worried about the Communist Party taking over the world for one big reason, because China has a terrible, terrible human rights record, much, much worse than most of other countries. And I have been speaking about human rights topics most of my time on this subject about organ harvesting in China. The Chinese government started to take death row prisoners' organs in the 1970s, 80s. And then in the 1999, they started to persecute Falun Gong, this meditation group, who meditate for better health. But the Communist Party think this is a threat to their propaganda system. They started a massive persecution in 1999. And the government has been using organs of Falun Gong for transplant. Here, US, we wait for 3 years for the kidney transplants. And in China, every hospital can find the donors within a week, because they already have numerous Falun Gong and Uyghurs and underground Christians and political dissidents. Their organs and blood types were tested and ready to be killed. The Chinese government already documented 100% of Uyghurs' blood type and DNA. And so like we all know that that's part of the organ transplant business. And they have a lot of other human rights abuses I will not go through today. But I have to say one thing important is that the Chinese Communist Party killed over 80 million Chinese in the past century. And you wonder, how can they still maintain authority after killing so many people? Because the authority has been very successful in brainwashing people. Just for example, I came to the US in 1994. And I remember in 1995, my colleagues at Caltech asked me about Tiananmen Massacre, right? You all know Tiananmen Massacre, so famous. And in 1995, I was still a very brainwashed Chinese student. I said there was no massacre, as the students were so bad, they killed the soldiers. Because all over Chinese media, all I saw was dead bodies of soldiers, and the government said the students killed the soldiers. And I believed that, right? That was a common sense to Chinese people at that time. And when my friends showed me about the video and pictures of Tiananmen Massacre, I saw, Hollywood made them. It took me a long time to away from those propaganda. But this is how much propaganda is in China and how deep people are brainwashed. Like, people did not know the history of Communist Party because the government control all media, the government control all books, every piece of art, every music piece, and every post on social media. So that they can put people in this bubble of information that is filtered by the government. And of course, you cannot see Western media, right, in China. You cannot watch CNN or read LA Times or Washington Post in China. And every year, China limited, about 34 foreign films can be shown in China. And of course, these foreign films have to be adapted to pass the censorship of the government before they can be shown in Chinese market. And the internet in China is blocked. It's like an internet, because the Chinese government built this great firewall on top of Chinese internet to filter out all other information except those allowed by the government. And on top of this great firewall, China has over 2 million internet police that their job is to delete the posts and trace down IPs. If you search in your home computer, search for information about Tiananmen Massacre, they can trace down the IP and then find out where you live, and then they can come to arrest you. So this is a part of control and propaganda system in communist China to keep people inside this bubble. And this is also the most heavily surveillance country in the world. For example, neighborhood committee in China is very different from neighborhood committee here. Neighborhood committee is formed by Communist Party members living on the block. And their job is to monitor every household to find out what you're doing. If you're a Christian, they want to find out. If you're a family Christian member instead of government Christian member, they report you to the authority. By the way, you probably know that the Chinese government Christians, Christian churches actually teach something very different from Christianity. They taught said God let Communist Party come to save you, so Christians should join the party. So of course, real Christians would have their fellowship at home, and then that's regarded as as a cult by the Chinese government. And Communist Party chapter is required in every entity in China, including all schools or companies. Like once you reach a certain size, you have to have a Communist Party chapter running. That includes Western companies in China. If we talk about Disney in Shanghai, right? Disney has a Communist Party chapter, and Disney has to pay for the operation of the Communist Party chapter according to the Chinese law. And according to the Chinese law, once your company reaches certain size, you must have at least one Communist Party member sitting on the wall to watch the progress, like monitor the company's business. And China has over 200 million surveillance cameras. Now, actually, the number is probably much higher. That was a number like a few years ago. That installed all over the country, like this Tiananmen Square, this cover, every point is covered with surveillance camera. That also includes some classrooms in China, because the government wants to know what the teachers are teaching to their students in classrooms. And now they have collected so much information, and the Chinese government is also at the world leading role of artificial intelligence. So they use AI to analyze all the information they caught from surveillance camera, from hardware, from software, several apps. They can identify who is doing what. And even if you wear your mask and walk in public, AI can tell from the way you walk to find out who you are and what you're doing. And China also have this social credit, system that each individual in China has a profile. Like you have a score about how much you love the Communist Party, right? If on your cell phone app you complain, you can text message to your friend, say, oh, I hate this government. You may lose a couple points. Like if you post an article on social media complaining about the government, you may lose like a couple, like 10, 20, 30 points. And when your points lower to a certain level, your travel app can turn the color, right? And then whenever you board a bus or airplane, you need to scan the travel app. Then automatically you're on the house arrest. You can't go anywhere. So this is a whole social credit score like a system. And of course, you can also post some articles praising the Communist Party, and then your score will go up. So basically, this whole system of surveillance applies to every individual living in China, because all the hardwares, all the softwares are monitored by the Chinese government. And that also include softwares and hardwares made in China and used by Americans. And here, this year, we have a lot of discussion about TikTok ban and other subjects. And think about it, China passed national intelligence in 2017 that require every Chinese company to submit data to the government. So TikTok is a Chinese company, right? So it has to submit data to the Chinese government. Otherwise, they would break the Chinese law. And that also applies to WeChat and Temu, a lot of popular apps in China. They have been very aggressive in collecting information from each cell phone. And we all know that you install an app, you need to get some approval, say, oh, you can access your phone book, access this and that. Every app requires. But TikTok collects so much information that it can make a replica of your phone. That also include your clipboard that stored all the passwords to all your accounts. TikTok actually can grab all of them and make a complete replica of your phone. And that's really strange because you don't need so much information to run an app. And the reason they catch so much information, maybe it's just for business reason, like they want to know everything about you so that they can, sell advertise to you. But these information are also accessible by the Chinese government, according to the Chinese National Intelligence Law. And all the Chinese-made apps has a problem, and a lot of the hardware made in China also has this problem. For example, here is the way the Chinese government let their hardware dominate the world. Subsidies, like they would give money to the company so that they can make products that are cheap, sold at a very, very low price, so that they can dominate the market. And the government of China purposely had this strategy to let certain products in China to dominate the market. And number one is surveillance camera. And China made about 90% of the surveillance camera in the world. And when they are stored, all of the work and the data are stored in the China's data center, right? That can be accessed by the Chinese government. And also drones flying all over the world. DJI is the world's largest drone company, Dajiang, produce about 90% of drones in the world, and they fly all over the world. And all the video they call, of course, are backed up in China's data center that can be accessed by the Chinese government. And the intelligent cargo planes, you may not think about this. Like, I live in Los Angeles. Long Beach port is one of the major ports in West Coast. And they have many cargo planes. Now they're all intelligent. They can automatically detect what is in the cargo, where it came from, where it goes. And they can be remotely accessed and controlled. So about 75% of cargo planes in the world are made in China by one company, one Chinese company. They can be remotely accessed. But that also raised national security issue, right? We have so many military bases have, stuff coming in and out. And all these cargo planes can detect what is going in, what is going out, and that can be remotely accessed to stop functioning at any time. And I did not put electric cars there yet, because it's not yet a threat. But China, the Chinese government subsidized their electric cars. They made such a cheap electric car. You can buy one as low as 14K, 14K for an electric car from China. Once they come to the US market, they will soon dominate the market. But these are also intelligent, right? Like they would drive along the road, take all the picture and all the AI involved. They can also be remotely accessed. So that's also a huge problem. So besides national security issue, we also have a problem of these social apps like TikTok and WeChat spreading propaganda. Because these are Chinese-made apps, of course, they have to follow Chinese government's rule about what kind of film, what kind of information, what kind of post to promote. And nowadays, about 50% of Americans use TikTok, and most people access news from TikTok. And it's basically living in the Chinese society, even they live physically in the US, they live in the world of the Chinese government's information system. That can also greatly change the mindset of Americans. And the traditional media is not any better. This is a screenshot of Washington Post several years ago. If you look at this screenshot, you may think China Watch, there must be a blog about China run by the Washington Post. But no, this is paid advertisement by the Chinese government to Washington Post. The Chinese government paid over 30 mainstream media around the world, here's a map, to run China Watch as a newspaper insertion. These are advertisements. And you may think you don't like to read advertisements, you just skip them. But here's an example of LA Times, April 29th, 2020. That particular issue of LA Times had 38 pages. And 11 out of the 38 pages are called international daily. The layout just looked like the rest of the LA Times. And all the contents came from the Chinese government. Of course, every article said it's a pandemic time, the Communist Party did such a great job taking care of Chinese people, much better than the American government. And communism is such a great system in controlling the virus, much better than democracy, right? So people read this day after day from LA Times. And they thought, oh, this is independent media. Like very few people see the very tiny font and say this is paid advertising. They say, it's LA Times said so every day, that must be true. Communism is a better system for the world. And this is also how they influence Americans day after day and year after year. And now in universities, we have a problem. In universities, Confucius Institute is a free Chinese language program operated by the Chinese government in over 100 universities and over 500 high schools in the US. So it teaches the Communist Party's version of history. For example, like here's a video people found on the Confucius Institute about Korean War. It said that it said in Mandarin that Americans started the Korean War. Americans invaded North Korea, then they wanted to invade China. And that was the version of Korean War I learned in China as a student. But now we're talking about UCLA, talking about Stanford, all these top universities. When our children go to these universities and take history class about Asian history, right? They outsource to local Confucius Institute. And this is education they're learning. And the incentive that the Chinese government sends them all the textbooks, all the teachers, and universities provide students in classrooms. So basically, for them, it's like a free funding, free education program. They're willing to accept that. And although the American government, the US, started giving funding to those universities running Confucius Institute, about 90% of them closed nowadays. But the problem is that these universities still look for free programs from China. They disconnected the relationship with Confucius Institute, but then they started to build up other connection with other Chinese language programs operated by the Chinese government. So basically, they're just bypassing, the US federal law by choosing another Chinese university to collaborate with. We still have the same problem about academic freedom in our universities. And Hollywood is really interesting. Like AMC used to be a top cinema chain in the US. And Dalian Wanda, a Chinese company, bought AMC in 2012. And through AMC, Dalian Wanda bought other entertainment industry like Carmichael Cinemas, Legendary Entertainment. So for 9 years, before AMC was sold, right? For 9 years, all these Hollywood companies belong to a Chinese mother company. That means they have to follow Chinese government's rule of what kind of film to make and show. So these already permanently changed Hollywood in those 10 years. And because nowadays about 2/3 of big productions in Hollywood have money from China, investment from China. And they all want to go to the Chinese market because Chinese market is the #1 film market. They have so many people. And then they have to compete with each other to enter the market. They have to make films most favored by the Chinese government to enter the market. So if you look at the big productions like the Martian, Gravity, right? American astronauts got stuck in deep space and can't come back. Who came to rescue them? The Chinese government. Not the Chinese people, the Chinese government sent a space shuttle to save them. And so the take-home message from these Hollywood films, #1, Communist Party is our friend. They came to rescue us when we're in trouble. And #2, communism is a better system because we cannot get our astronauts back and they have better technology. Isn't that a propaganda? That is exactly the way we receive the information in China. But now we see this in these big productions in Hollywood. And also I want to have a quick mention of the police stations, overseas Chinese police stations. We know that at least there are 100 secret police stations, at least 2 in Los Angeles, and I know another 2 in New York. And this actually is very troubling to people like me, right? I have been speaking about human rights in China. And the first day I stepped out and I went to protest, I was from LA Times, a 4-page article, a 4-page image of me. And I never went back to China again since 1998. I mean, the first time I was spoken out about this was 2001. So I never went back to China. But now you see Chinese police station in Los Angeles. How do you think I will feel? Does that make me feel safe? No, definitely not the case. I see the extended arm of the Chinese government in Los Angeles to monitor Chinese people like me, to monitor what I'm doing, and oftentimes dissidents got threats from these police stations, like the agents, to return to China or stop speaking about certain issues. And unfortunately, many foreign governments, especially US government, are still very lack of understanding about to distinguish Chinese people from the Chinese government. They always saw the Chinese government stand for Chinese people without realizing that so many Chinese came to the US for freedom because they don't want to be monitored, brainwashed by the Chinese government. But having this long-arm police of Chinese government in the land of the US really troubled Chinese Americans, especially Chinese Americans like us, because we are here for freedom. So I think we still have a long way to go to raise awareness, what is the best way to support Asian community, to tell the difference between Asian American, Chinese American from a totalitarian regime. And also worldwide, I want to have a mention of China's Belt and Road Initiative. China has over 150 countries in this program. And the way it runs is China would approach a country with financial difficulty like Sri Lanka, right? Say, we're going to give you a big loan to build this infrastructure, airport. And then usually they would bribe elected officials in the country by sending money to their personal account. Then they would sign the contract. But after these programs were done, it's irreversible. Usually this kind of construction works do not help local economy because the Chinese government will send them all the construction worker, all the material. It does not help local economy at all. And by the end of this project, these countries receive a big bill. Then they cannot afford it. And then they would have to sign contract with the Chinese government. Let the Chinese government take over the infrastructure. And Sri Lanka lost one of its major ports to the Chinese government because of the financial trap. It also went bankrupt several years later. And that was how the Chinese government influence is gained its military influence worldwide. And that was also how it controlled the United Nations. Because UN runs like each nation has one vote. And China has so many votes because of the Belt and Road Initiative. Especially in organizations like the Human Rights Council, China can have dominant votes because most of the members are in Belt and Road Initiative. And the Chinese government is able to do so much because the Communist Party is powered by trade. Whenever Western companies do business in China, they have this naive fantasy saying they're going to help Chinese people. But the Chinese government used cheap labor and the slave labor. And then people got a very small percentage. And the Communist Party chapters got the most money to monitor the rest of Chinese and come to buy our American freedom. And Western companies in China have a terrible record of human rights. Cisco helped the Chinese government to build the Great Firewall Internet, including the system of tracing down IPs. Google, Microsoft, and Facebook helped Chinese government on artificial intelligence, on how to catch dissidents quickly and go through all this surveillance information. Yahoo gave its email contacts to the Chinese police, say they had to follow Chinese law. And several Chinese reporters used the Yahoo email to discuss human rights projects. And these emails became evidence for the Chinese government to sentence them to 80 years, 10 years in prison. But despite all the sad news, we are seeing great changes in China at a grassroots level, because this is how the Communist Party control people, right? They would always target less than 5% of the population and tell the rest than 95% say, you stand with the government and let's crack down this 5%. And then they keep rotating the target every 5 to 10 years until everyone become a victim and the rest of the population stand with the government. But Falun Gong, they would not follow this rule. Like Falun Gong believe in truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. So they protest in public to rescue their fellow practitioners. And that inspired many Chinese. Nowadays, there's like a 250,000 protests every year in China. So that really is a big change in Chinese community, especially Falun Gong practitioners. They started to print flyers and make DVDs and distribute them to the neighborhood to awake Chinese people from propaganda. And also Falun Gong practitioners in the US are having 3 software companies to write free VPNs to help Chinese people to bypass Great Firewall. And all these efforts, about 30% of internet users nowadays in China regularly bypass Great Firewall. And this greatly started a human rights movement in 2004. China started to have human rights lawyers. People started to sign petitions for victims. And they also started to quit the Communist Party. Because the Communist Party runs like a mafia way. They always screen for the most outstanding people in the community and then try to recruit you. And you have to join. If you say you don't want to join, you become a dissident. Then you cannot quit, because you say you want to quit the party, you also become a dissident. That's why in 2004, a group of volunteers in San Diego started a website that allowed people to use a VPN and post a statement on this website and say, I want to quit the Communist Party, I want to quit the youth league of the Communist Party, that's for high schoolers, or the young pioneer of the Communist Party, that's for middle schoolers, for elementary kids. Then they can get a digital certificate with a unique serial number. And this is important if you want to be a US citizen. I became a US citizen in 2013. And in the naturalization process, I had to answer a standard question. Have you ever joined the Nazi, ISIS, or Communist Party? If the answer was yes, you cannot be a US citizen. then Chinese people can submit this digital certificate, say, I quit the party, this is my serial number, and this is the date. Has to be at least 5 years before you become a US citizen. And the immigration office, the US government, accept this as an official document of quitting the Communist Party. And the number I see this week is 429 million people quit the party in the past 20 years. And now to say this is the most encouraging news from China and also very inspiring for the rest of us in the world. And I have a blog publishing my talk points with references. And as I mentioned, I'm a scientific curator, so I always annotate with references. And you can go there if you want to dig out more information. And I want to send 2 books. One is written by Chinese human rights lawyer Gao Zhishen about his experience of being human rights lawyer in China. And I have been working for Amnesty for over 20 years on human rights in China. And Gao Zhishen, because of his work of taking human rights cases in China, he has been disappeared. That means Chinese government took him in 2017, and he was never seen again. We don't even know whether he's alive. But he published this book before he disappeared. So that's a recommended read if you like reading. And I also want to introduce another book, How the Spectre of Communism is Ruling Our World. It's written by like a dozen authors, but about the history of Communist Party trying to infiltrate into the Western society. It's a very good read, but authors chose to remain anonymous to protect their family in China. So I highly recommend these 2 books. I have a few copies with me today. You can have a look afterwards. And I will end my talk here. I skipped quite a few slides about foreign partnership, trade or academia. But anyway, I hope I can answer some of your questions, if possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Wen. Well, we have questions here in the room, and then we'll also take some questions if there's some from online. Because we have the online, I'd ask each person to use the microphone. Just raise your hand, I'll get you the mic. Questions? Yes.
So I'm Canadian, and I've been listening a lot to what's happening in the Canadian politics with the intelligence that's come out, that evidence that the Chinese government interfered significantly in the last Canadian election.
Yes.
And it's received a lot of media space in Canada, but I assume that's also been happening here in the US, but I just haven't seen that on our radar screen when we look at American politics. So is it happening, and why is it?
It's definitely happening, but I think Canada and Australia is much worse.
Okay.
Much worse than the US, because in Canada, in Australia, there was a congressman actually was a Communist Party member in China, actually worked for Chinese military, right? That's pretty interesting. And in Canada also have similar problem. I think the problem is like the Chinese government have been sending people to other countries and as agents, right? Like, to run for election and become community leaders, or like become, work in American churches, the infiltration in the American churches. That's also a problem. I'm probably going to talk about that. Yes, that's definitely a problem. Except like the United States is not that bad yet, but I can see if we don't pay attention to this, it will become.
So why was Canada and Australia just more vulnerable because they don't have as much security systems, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think like, if a country or a region is heavily dependent on China for business, right? I think your Australian business economy is highly dependent on China. And Taiwan actually is even worse, because the problem with Taiwan is like Taiwanese regard China as part of Taiwan. So it's legit for a Chinese company to buy American Taiwanese media, right? You remember like a Chinese company tried to buy New York Times. It was not approved because it's national security issue. That didn't happen. But in Taiwan, they can freely come to buy Taiwanese media. So we see a problem here. Like, if a country has loophole or not willing to pay attention to this, then the Chinese government have more and more control in the local economy, have more and more influence. And I think one thing very bad is like they can control a lot of local organizations and turn local organizations into proxies for the Chinese government, then that's a very bad scenario. Because, you know, when a local organization like a business association want to do business in China and they're willing to lobby for the Chinese government, then we have a problem. I hope I can, this is my answer.
Well, like, as I say, I was just largely wondering why it hasn't happened or hasn't hit the media as much here in the US, because I'm sure that it's happening and it's all over the Canadian news up there with their public.
I'm sure it is happening, but not as bad yet. They have not been that successful. But I think in California, especially in Northern California, the infiltration is much worse than the rest of the US. And I heard a saying from the Chinese community that the Chinese government can decide who will be the next San Francisco mayor. I mean, there's a saying in the local Chinese community, San Francisco.
I have a question about the secret police stations in LA and New York. When I think of police here, I think of an organization that investigates crimes and has powers of arrest. Do these secret Chinese police stations arrest people?
They wouldn't arrest people, they would force people to go to China, go back. I think the trick is like, for example, you know, as a public speaker, right? I may have family members in China. And then they can come to approach me saying, if you don't go back to China, your parents will, you know, suffer from this and that. And they do have a way to threaten local Chinese and force them to go to China.
Let me just check quickly, are there any questions online, Chen?
Yep.
Okay, so go right here to the front.
Does the Chinese Communist Party compete with the Russian Communist Party for influence, or do they combine their efforts in unison for a common goal, or are those two parties totally independent of one another?
I think the Russian government have a very interesting, has a very interesting relationship with the Chinese government. That'd be very interesting. It's also like about North Korea, right? They have very interesting, because obviously China is the most powerful countries in the alliance now, because no other country has such influence, has such money. Think about, can Russia run a Confucius Institute here? There's no way, right? Right, like, you know, Russian government cannot buy American media, but in America, quite a few media were already bought, like purchased by the Chinese government, some radio stations. I know Chinese government own at least 15 major radio stations here in the US, but we don't hear anything about North Korea and Russia, like in that kind of level of influence. So definitely, I think China is a dominant role in this alliance. But those regimes like Russia and North Korea, they don't want to be puppet rulers either. So it's like a competition, but they're trying to play the balance. They want to get a maximum benefit from China without breaking the alliance, but they don't want to become puppet rulers. So it's very interesting, a relationship you see that. I think like if you work on foreign policy, probably you have a lot of strategy you can play, right? Like, you know, how to separate them, how to pull North Korea away from China. I mean, if you work on foreign policy, that must be very, very interesting to look at this relationship.
Would we have your slides available?
I have that, if you see that blog article actually has all the links, and most of the pictures actually took from those links. You can take.
Hi, thank you. This was a great presentation. I just have kind of a follow-up question about China and North Korea.
North Korea.
Yes. How much leverage do the Chinese government have over North Korea and its management and use of this?
Definitely a lot, I think. Definitely a lot of leverage because North Korea economically heavily depend on China. Heavily depend on China. But Kim Jong-un, I mean, it's interesting, like, as I mentioned, they don't want to be public rulers. So actually, North Korea regime, they completely denied China's role in the Korea War. Like they said, North Koreans fight the whole war by themselves. They claim that China was not involved. So this is really interesting, right? And we think about Korea War, right? Because, the Chinese army went through the river and, fight. And many people died, like 500,000 Chinese died in the Korean War. But the North Korean government completely denied the fact. They said, we fight, we did this. And it's just a very, very interesting relationship here. And China definitely want to keep North Korea as its proxy, because that's, they want to see North Korea creating a lot of trouble. And then international society will say, oh, we need to engage China so that they can control North Korea. So they're very willing to play this game to keep North Korea a troublemaker in the world.
Yeah. Wow. So, thank you for your talk. Well, first I have a small question, which is, I wonder where you got the figure for like the 400 million like people who left the party, because we know that the Chinese Communist Party hasn't had ever more than 100 million members.
Oh, no, that's accumulated in the past 20 years. And also that also includes the Youth League and the Young Pioneers. Yeah, so like the Youth League and Young Pioneer, actually the number is very large. Like if you ever go to school in China, they almost require every student to join the Young Pioneer.
But the claim is that, a third of the population of China left the party through the program that you said.
It's definitely a very high percentage. I wouldn't know whether it's half or like it's definitely a very high percentage. Basically, this is a website that the people can create anonymously without using the real identity, but they themselves has a certificate. So the goal is like they can quit the party, they can have a certificate without letting the authority know who they are. But this basically, if you go online, you can find all their nicknames or anonymous certificates. So it's pretty interesting. But at least I see that's an effort of people like abandon communism. When Soviet Union collapsed, like many Westerners may think it's a magical thing, right? But in reality, we all know that in Soviet Union, for decades, like people disliked communism. That's why overnight it happened. And I think the goal of this movement is to awake Chinese from the propaganda of the Communist Party, so that we will see the change happen. And we do see the change happen already, because if you look at all these human rights lawyers, right, there's thousands of them in China, and so many Chinese people sign petitions for victims. I mean, that's already very, very encouraging. They bypass the Great Firewall, and they support each other. And I mean, I just see like I already saw the trend in the past 20 years. Like, you don't have to count. And also that number is from 20 years. 20 years ago, someone quit the party may already pass away, right? But there's no way for us to find out. But this is the number they accumulated in the 20 years.
And then my follow-up question is, I had a question as to why you support the idea of Falun Gong, which is a large religious organization with relatively opaque workings, right? And a structure that is not really open to right, as the potential source of democratic or civic change in China.
I started to practice Falun Gong when I was a graduate student in Caltech. That was in 1998. And in 1998, the Chinese consulate promoted Falun Gong and Tai Chi to Chinese students in our area. So everyone come to learn Falun Gong and Tai Chi, promote the traditional Chinese culture. So at that time, almost every student in Caltech learned Falun Gong. And I found it very helpful for me for better health and more energetic at work. But then I was very surprised to find after 1 year that the Chinese government started this big persecution and started to demonize Falun Gong. As a Falun Gong practitioner for 26 years, I can share with you how the practice works. It's basically a personal practice. You can learn Falun Gong online or from someone you know, and it's always free of charge because according to the teachings of Falun Gong, truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, you should not make a profit from the practice. So you cannot charge people a fee when you teach someone to practice. That's why there are volunteers set up the Falun Gong website and post all the audio and video online. you can learn by yourself. So if you want to learn Falun Gong, you can always do it by yourself. You don't have to join any organization. And people oftentimes will go to a nearby practice site like a park or like a university or library, they meditate together weekly or something. But you don't need to go to any of them. And once you join the practice site, you may also subscribe to a local email list. Like usually we call it activist email list. But like if you want to join local activities like a group exercise or go to any protest events, you can go there. And so basically Falun Gong is it's like a very individual practice. And I would say because it's very loosely organized, so outside people oftentimes think it's mystical because you really don't know how people make all this happen, right? But I myself have organized quite a few events in Falun Gong movement, like especially before I have kids. Before 2003, I actually organized a big protest in Los Angeles against Hong Kong's. I think that how do you say that? They tried to pass national security law in Hong Kong in 2003. So that was quite an experience. But like these are all purely organized by email. People can come and they don't have to come. And so sometimes it's very hard to predict how many people will show up. And Falun Gong also, some of the practitioners started the Epoch Times, and because they want to have a media reporting uncensored news about China, because they realize the Chinese government have so much influence on Chinese media here. The Chinese media market before 2000 basically just copied everything Xinhua News, like the Chinese state government asked them to publish. So they started with the Chinese Epoch Times, and my husband actually was one of the persons started with the Chinese Epoch Times in Southern California for uncensored news about China. Their first group of reporters were in China, and they were all arrested by the Chinese government. And since then, they no longer report reporters in China. You all have to report from overseas. And even those China reporters in the US, they have to stay anonymous when they publish articles about China to protect their family in China. So basically, this is my experience about Falun Gong. And I do feel like it's very hard to know the truth if the mainstream media do not cover much information. But I hope my personal presence can give you some idea about it. Yeah, actually on my blog, I also published one article, a bullet point list about Falun Gong and human rights abuse in China. I was invited to give a talk to Taiwanese human rights organizations in February. So I crafted a talk and posted some information. And Falun Gong actually is the largest organization persecuted in China. According to Amnesty International and the United Nations and the US State Department, the percentage of dissidents in China, we're talking about dissidents detained by the Chinese government, about 80% of them are Falun Gong practitioners. So this is the largest group persecuted in China. And the main reason is that Falun Gong practice traditional Chinese value, truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. And that to the Communist Party is a competition to the communism ideology. And when they started the persecution, Jiang Zemin, the Communist Party leader, started the persecution. People asked him why he wanted to target Falun Gong because these are people just studying it. He said Falun Gong is competing with Communist Party for human hearts, for people's heart. He would not tolerate that. So, and also for the same reason, the Chinese government is targeting Uyghurs, targeting Tibetans, targeting Mongolians, because all this traditional belief, from their own ethnic group is also independent thinking to the Communist Party. They also feel like if Uyghurs stick to Uyghur culture, it becomes very hard to brainwash them. If Tibetans stick to Tibetan culture, it's very hard to control and brainwash them. And they also target all religions, like I said, Christians in China. You cannot send the Bible to China. It's illegal because Bible in China is a different version approved by the Chinese Communist Party. So that's how they control religion. That's how they control Buddhism, Christianity, and Taoism. Right? But they cannot do the same to Falun Gong because of the loose organization. There's no, you don't need to register people to meditate at home. So that's why they put the millions of people in prison. And they also try to, mislead people, like, by giving you some article about Falun Gong, try to tell you this is what Falun Gong founder published. But that's why Falun Gong, all the publication from the founder were only from one website, the Minghui.org. That's the only legit website for people to get information about Falun Gong. He said he would not publish anything else website so that the Communist Party cannot interfere with the teachings. So yeah, there's a lot going on there in China. It's like very hard to distinguish lie from the truth. But I hope that this can open the door for people to think and ask. Yes.
We know that large numbers of Uyghurs are detained in massive camps.
Yes. Couple million.
You have a number of Uyghurs who might be in those camps, or a percentage of Uyghurs who are detained.
I think the number I got is like a couple million, like 1 million to 2 million. And you know, people can from satellite picture can see all these structures of concentration camps. And I also personally, I'm a friend, one of my friends here in Los Angeles, not here, in Los Angeles, is an activist on Uyghur. Like his family are detained in one of those camps. And he has been speaking out on Uyghur issues. And he said that actually many Uyghurs in those labor camps nowadays are sent to other parts of China and work as slave laborers because they don't need so many slave laborers in Xinjiang. So they actually took men, a lot of men from Xinjiang to other parts of the country and work in the factories as slave laborers. And I also have another talk crafted on women's rights in China. I'm going to speak to a Rotary Club tomorrow about women's rights in China. I'm going to speak about the Uyghurs women. And China stopped the one-child policy in 2015, right? But they started to sterilize Uyghur women starting from 2015. You look at the curve. Han Chinese women stopped sterilization completely, right? And then Uyghur women started. They all started to get sterilized. So like that's also one of the evidence that they want to, the genocide.
We have a presentation.
Hang on, I'll get you the microphone here, so they can hear you online.
Thank you. 2017, 2018, we had a presentation here in Olympia by a Uyghur person. She was a University of Washington student, and her mother was put in the intern labor camps.
Yeah.
And she did quite a bit of documentation and shared it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the number was about 4 million.
4 million.
4 million Uyghurs.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, and then take the men away to different states,
Mhm.
and then Chinese soldiers can stay with in their homes.
Yeah. Actually, I heard like in Xinjiang, actually, like the Chinese soldiers or Communist Party member would go into their home and sleep with them.
Exactly.
Basically, it's like monitor them 24/7. And also as a Chinese, as a Han Chinese, I always tell people that the Uyghurs problem is not the conflict between Uyghur and Chinese, definitely not. It's a Communist Party against humanity. Because the Communist Party is also persecuting Chinese. Falun Gong, they're all Chinese. They practice traditional Chinese value. And when you see Communist Party persecute Falun Gong, it's Communist Party persecuting Chinese people and trying to eliminate the Chinese culture. My parents survived the Great Cultural Revolution. That's for 10 years. The Communist Party eliminated the whole school system in China. They do not allow any education because now, seeing like any education gives you independent thinking. Then you criticize the government, right? And then they package Communist Party into the superficial form of Chinese, say, oh, this is Chinese culture, but actually they teach you communism under the cover. But when they see people practice Falun Gong, practice other traditional Chinese belief, they think this is a threat because they hate this essence of traditional Chinese culture. They think that's a threat to their authority. So I always tell people that it's not Uyghurs, Chinese against Uyghurs. It's not a Chinese against Tibetan. It's not a Chinese against Taiwanese. It's a Communist Party against humanity.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you for your talk. I wanted you to comment on two things. One, there's a major Chinese theatrical production that comes to Seattle every year or two. And it also goes to other major cities in the United
I think it's
States.
Chen Yun, right?
And I've heard that it's a Falun Gong
Yes, well,
organization.
I can explain that to you. So Shen Yun actually, most of the performers, I'll say most, maybe not all of them, like are Falun Gong practitioners. So I mentioned these efforts, right, like creating internet companies to help Chinese people bypass firewall and creating newspapers report the news about China. And in 2006 and 2007 or so, there are many Chinese dancers and musicians from all over the world and also from Taiwan gathered in New York to produce a show without Communist Party censorship. And the goal is to create a production, live stage production about China without communism. So I grew up in China before I came here when I was 20, in my 20s. Every day, all the time I saw Chinese performance or dances praising Communist Party, right? So like my impression of Chinese dance was like, oh, they praise Communist Party, that's Chinese dance. So the first time I saw Shen Yun in 2007, I saw this performance about ancient Chinese history, like, that we read in books like written hundreds of years ago. And I was so surprised because I said, oh, I always saw the Chinese dance is praising Communist Party. And I didn't like them because they look so violent. But when I saw Shen Yun, I was very, very encouraged because they're so elegant. And so I started to volunteer for Shen Yun since 2007. After I watched the first show, I volunteered for them for 10 years until 2016. So basically I work in Los Angeles, helping on the tickets, on show promotion, to sell the tickets. Because Shen Yun is a performing arts company that run in a very sustainable way. Although it's formed by professional dancers and musicians in 2017, they started to recruit teenagers all over the world every year and train them and produce a new show every year around the world. So these teenagers, after they join Shen Yun, they get a full scholarship. It's like you become a high school student specialized in dance and music, but all the tuition are covered and the living expenses are covered. And this full scholarship came from ticket sale. So when you pay $200 to buy a Shen Yun ticket, right? Theater will take maybe $30, $40, and the rest of $160 goes to Shen Yun and goes to this school, so that they have enough money to pay every student full scholarship. And it's not easy to get in because every year they have worldwide audition in every May in New York. Also, when they tour in every city, you can directly audition with these groups, as a musician or dancer. Usually they recruit teenagers, 15-year-olds, youngest maybe 30, but older maybe 20. But it's very hard to get in, very, 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 very competitive. Because basically if you can get in, you get best quality education for free with full scholarship. But it's very, very competitive. My two children both studied Chinese pipa when they were in middle school. And both girls auditioned for Shen Yun for 3 years. They cannot get in because every year Shen Yun only accepted one new pipa player, and they were never good enough to be accepted. And then they switched to STEM when they were in high school. Now one is in Caltech, the other one is in UCLA, both studying electric engineer. But it's very, very difficult to be a professional musician for Shen Yun. But I really like the idea that they don't solicitate for donation. Everything came from the ticket sale. It's a very sustainable way to run an education system to teach the artists, musicians, about the traditional Chinese culture without communism. And you probably see the commercial, they are obviously very, very good. That's why I think they got very successful shows. That's why they dismissed me in 2016. They said, we don't need so many volunteers anymore. You can do whatever you like. And that's why I came here to give talks, because I got so much free time.
So a second question is, in the news today, it was reported that Congress is considering requiring TikTok to be sold within 9 months. And then they reported the TikTok organizations that they're not going to do that, or else the Chinese government said one or the other. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mentioned the TikTok in my talk, right? The TikTok, the biggest problem is collecting data of so many people, and they can be accessed by the Chinese government. definitely there's national security issue, because we're thinking about all these facial recognition, right? A 13-year-old boy may not think it's a big deal. But you know, think about it, you can change your passport, you cannot change your face unless you have plastic surgery, right? So when this 30-year-old grow into 25 or 30, he may work in the military, he may run for Congress, but the Chinese authority already have all information about him. They can use his biological data to enter a lot of these accounts that associate with him. So that is a huge problem. And I don't think the Chinese government would allow him to accept. Definitely not. They already made it clear. But we also have to think about, like, you know, technology always evolve, right? You know, remember 10, 20 years ago, we used MySpace, WhatsApp, how many people are still using those apps, right? So technology always come and go. If one app is gone, another app will replace it, like Instagram Reel, right? It's also a very good movement I heard. So definitely, like, I don't think it will be the end of the world if TikTok quit the market. Gradually will be replaced by something else. But I do feel like Americans, especially young Americans, are very lack of knowledge about the problem of TikTok. They just think it's convenient, it's fun. They do not realize like how much information they have been given to a totalitarian regime. And not only like, you know, for national security, for themselves, it's also. So that a foreign government control all the information.
Why don't we go ahead, we'll do one more question, give our speaker an opportunity to breathe a little bit.
I was just wondering if you're familiar with the author, Peter Hessler, writes for the New Yorker. He's written at least 3, maybe 4 wonderful books in his time in China. And he stays out of politics and talks and reports and wrote books about people in China. And they're amazing books. So I would, I guess, recommend them. But thank you.
I will look it up. And actually, I'm also a big fan of traditional Chinese culture. As I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, every Lunar New Year, I craft a new talk for Caltech. And this year, I spoke about working women in ancient China. And last year, I spoke about the history of tea in China. And so if you go to my blog, you may find some of the recordings of my talk at Caltech. And also, I want to answer the question about the Shen Yun, because I was interviewed by LA Times in 2016 about the Shen Yun. And they specifically asked, like, you know, where the money go. And I already addressed, like, all the proceeds from Shen Yun support the school. And Falun Gong, the local Falun Gong association do not get money from the Shen Yun shows. And I also want to mention this to Tian, because he asked about Falun Gong. And there's one principle in Falun Gong practice that the Falun Dafa Association cannot save money, cannot have money. So basically, like whenever we have activities, usually are individuals, we say, oh, we're going to organize a parade. We're going to put our money together and apply for booths or like a police parade entry fee. But like, you know, we cannot, as an organization, we cannot save money or have a collection of money sitting in the account. Usually just project-based, people put the money there and all the money go to pay for certain activities. So this is, I think many people are curious about this. But I think it's very important for the practice of Falun Gong, because I think as the founder said in the teachings, like, you know, once people started to have money business, it's very easy to become corrupted. So just stay away from all the money issue. Like it's all individual practice. If you, like I sponsor myself to come to this talk. Like, you know, I travel, I use my salary and Caltech to pay for this travel, right? I stay in friend's house and book hotel. It's all by myself. And nobody sponsors me. And I'm very proud of it as an independent speaker. And I can do as much as I can. And that makes a huge difference, like as an individual, because that's my personal path of improve myself. But like as an organization, I think it's very good to stay away from the money business. And then, you know, can lose much trouble.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, my speaker. I will invite folks to come to our next meeting, which will be again on the third Thursday, yes, next month, and I'll have Chen here just give us a quick preview of what that presentation will be.
Yes, hello. So my colleague and also recently fired, perhaps for one more year, professor of English at St. Martin's University, Jeff Berkenstein. He's going to come here and give a talk titled Food, the Short Story and Fulbrighting. Jeff will come and speak about his experience traveling the world in search of great food and good stories, both universal ways of bringing people together. He will focus on his more than 2 decades teaching food and fiction here in Lake State, Washington at St. Martin's University, and as well as in Inner Mongolia, China, as well as Petrozavodsk, Russia, where he served 1 year as a Fulbright scholar. He'd also like to talk to you about applying for your own program, which many Americans do not know is something that is open to Americans from all trades and professions, not just academics. So that will be Thursday, May.
What's the location?
It will still be. And that will be here at the same location. We're looking for potential presenting with our new activities beginning in the fall, but our final program of this program year will be here in this facility.
And it's gonna be Thursday, May 16th.
So again, thank you very much for coming. If you want to help out and put your chairs on the rack, you can do that, or if you just want to go, that's fine too. Thanks.